Welcome to the Homeschool Counseling Network podcast, brought to you by the homeschoolcounselingnetwork.com, a website devoted to connecting homeschooling families with free resources in the areas of academic advising, counseling, testing, therapy, and tutoring to inspire, inform, and improve lives. In this podcast series, we chat with professionals in education, mental health, professional coaching, and therapy to help families on their home education journey. Hello, everyone, and welcome to our show. My name is Kimberly Bennett, and I am your host. If you're new here, welcome. Thanks for giving us a listen. A little bit about me. I am a licensed professional counselor of over 20 years, and I have been a homeschooling mom for 5 of those years. I am also an advocate for mental health and homeschooling children with learning differences. For more of my story and background, feel free to listen to episode 1 or check out my website at the homeschoolcounselingnetwork.com. Disclaimer. While I am a licensed mental health professional, the content in this podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be considered educational, medical, mental health, or therapy advice. This podcast is not intended to replace professional medical advice. The views expressed in this podcast may not be those of the host or the management. The presenter is simply presenting their views and welcomes any comments, suggestions, or correction of errors. Well, good afternoon. Today I am very excited to have in studio Amy Bodkin, EDS. We're going to be talking about her debut release, Special Needs Kids Are People Too, Seeing the Possibilities Through a Neurodiverse Lens. And I'm going to let Amy tell you a little bit about her. She's got a long list of accolades and accomplishments, but the one that endears me the most to her is she is a homeschooling mama, as well as an author, as well as working in the area of mental health and special needs. And she homeschools 2 children with special needs. So welcome, Amy. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Kimberly. I am autistic myself, so that's like one of the first things I usually tell people because, well, one, eventually it's obvious. You hang around me long enough, it comes out. But also I feel like in order to be able to talk about some of these things, you have to have kind of earned the right to be able to talk about them. And
Yes.
Being autistic, being also a former school psychologist, having a background in neuropsychology, also homeschooling both of my kids who also are autistic. We're all ADHD. We've got all kinds of different learning differences going on in our house. We've got different medical things going on in our house. And so all of those kind of come together to give me this 3-pronged perspective, experiencing it personally as a parent and then also as a professional.
Yeah.
So that's a little tiny bit about me. And of course, I started out my career working in public schools. And then eventually, when my kids were born, I started consulting with private schools because I wanted to be home with my kiddos so I could consult on the side as I was ready. But then eventually, I was homeschooling my own children because I knew what that would look like in public schools and I knew what it would look like in private schools. And I was like, I just want to do it myself.
Yes.
And so
I'm so nodding in agreement with you.
Yeah. So as I was homeschooling my own kids, I started having parents online ask me, hey, can you do a consult? Because they noticed kind of like what I was doing, the experiences I had. They're like, we want some of that. And so that's how I got started. That's how I got started doing what I do now. And now for a while there, I consulted at a Charlotte Mason Plenary, which is a homeschool company. I was their special needs consultant. Eventually, people started thinking that a Charlotte Mason Plenary was the special needs place because it got to be such a thing. And so I struck out on my own this past year with Amy Bodkin Consulting, and I get to consult with families worldwide, providing ongoing support, more specialized support in the form of a one-shot consult. I do a lot of advocacy work with my own podcast, and I also wrote this book. So
just a few hats, just a little busy.
yeah. I mean, I've got so many hats. I think I had 20 jobs by the time I graduated graduate school. Like, like that's why I say I'm also ADHD. Like, I can't stick with anything for very long. I got to try all the different things. Ooh, this looks fun. Let's try that.
Laughing with you, not at you. I'm like, I have so many diagnoses that were undiagnosed that, when you get that DSM the first time in grad school, you're going, oh no, no.
Yeah. I mean, there's the old joke that people study psychology to be able to fix themselves and their family. And well, it's not wrong.
It's not wrong. It's so not wrong. And then those of us with, who are functioning with it, you're Dory chasing after something new and shiny. Oh, look, here's something I want to pursue ad nauseum until I don't. And then I'm going to pursue the next thing. But I will say this, Amy is a member.
When she saw the movie, she said, Amy, this movie is you.
Wait, to talk to you, I read your book and I flew through it. I will say you can take your time with it, but I just felt seen and heard as both a professional and as a mom. And honestly, when I got to some of the case studies at the end, not to give anything away, but I saw myself. I saw so many of my students. I have a shared background in public education as well. And prior to that, even a little bit sadder, my connection was with juvenile justice. I saw so many of those children. Yes, yes. I wish, for those of you who are listening, if you're not watching the video version of this, hop on over to YouTube and watch the video version of this, because her face that she's showing right now, that look of complete despair, that you go, oh no, because that's the worst case scenario of where you want those kids to go. And I had such a large number of my population that's where those kids were. Unfortunately, yes, they got services while they were there, but they didn't have to be there. It could have been a different story, is all I'm saying. So yes, I share that background with you and that heart.
Yeah. Many of the public schools I worked with had lots of kids that were going through the system, the justice system. So I know exactly what you're talking about. It's heartbreaking.
It is absolutely heartbreaking, because we know there is another way. There is another way, and it's not the cookie cutter approach that mass education, especially public education, approaches. And it sounds terrible. Public school teachers work very hard. I am not beating up on them whatsoever. I did my time. I served my time in public education, and it has a purpose, and not everyone can homeschool by any means. But I just know that there are certain kids that benefit better from what we have created. And I realize that it is a luxury and a privilege to get to do what we get to do. So by no means is this meant to bash public education by any means whatsoever.
I think that oftentimes it is more that systems fail people, and that there's always going to be people in various systems who are failed. And that is one of the wonderful privileges of having the opportunity to homeschool, is that if your kid is one of those kids who would be failed by the system, you don't have to do that.
That's true. That is so true. That is so very true. Well, tell us a little bit for the listeners who are listening to this right now, this beautiful book that Amy has written, I'm telling you, tell us a little bit about some of your stats that you got on Amazon for this right after it came out, because this was just launched. When did this debut?
The beginning of May, and we were number one new release for parenting hyperactive children, number one new release for parenting. No, that was for teaching students with developmental and intellectual disabilities. We were in the top 100 of new special education releases and new education releases, which was huge. So we were very excited about that. We also, I have to say, I was kind of a bit flabbergasted because we also were above Temple Grandin's new release. And I was like, oh, wow. Because she's kind of like, whether you like her stuff or not, she's kind of a giant.
She is a
and it had a
giant.
huge impact. So
Yes.
it was, I was floored. So I'm very excited about the reception so far. And I'm just hoping to keep the momentum going because I'm very passionate about the subject.
And it shows. It shows when you read through her book. The way I sort of described this when I gave a little bit of a review of it was she takes us on this journey where you get a lesson in history and a lesson in biology and psychology and philosophy. It all brings it together. It's very kind of what we call a gestalt look at the whole person. It's saying, hey, you know, this is not just a label. This is not just a kid with a diagnosis. You have to, or a person with a diagnosis, you have to look at all of the different things that have brought us to this thus far, not just as an individual, but as a society, as systems, as you were speaking earlier. It's never just one thing, but particularly it is not just one thing. And I think it's important that you take the time to go through in those earlier chapters through all of the different lessons, even though I'm a professional, I'm licensed, I've been doing this for over 20 years. It was great for a refresher as a professional. It's great for a parent. If this is not, don't be put off by this. If you're like, well, I don't have a background in this, I can't possibly read this. No, this is a very parent-friendly book. It is written in layman's terms, and Amy breaks it down so that you can understand more of where we came from to get to where we are, if that makes sense. And she does an absolutely beautiful job. And within that book, after she gives you all of the foundation, because you need that beautiful foundation, you challenge us to go deeper, to examine all that we've learned and all that we thought we knew, while inviting us to learn more about the world and ourselves, and then to see ourselves through new eyes. I'm telling you, it's an absolutely beautiful journey, beautiful book. And it ends with these beautiful case studies. And I know you speak to it. I don't want to give it away. So Amy speaks further to a lot of the readers who've wanted to know some of the outcomes of the case studies. In the end, like, oh, well, what happened? Tell us more. Go check out Amy's podcast at, let's see, what is your website? Let me get that correct. At amybodkin.com, amybodkin.com, and listen to her podcast, and she will tell you some of the outcomes of those case studies, because they're beautiful stories. And many of you who are listening or who are watching this right now actually might see some of your students or even your child in these stories, even if it's just bits of it. And it will fill you up with knowledge, and it will fill your heart up with empathy and love and compassion for all of these different families and what they have gone through. So tell us a little bit, Amy, what has inspired you to write this book?
So at the time, I was just thinking, oh, I need to write this. It didn't really occur to me, like, why am I doing this? But as I've given it some thought, because I've had other people ask me the same thing, and I don't know, maybe it's the whole like autism ADHD thing where you're just kind of like, I feel like I'm sometimes wandering through life and just kind of going, ooh, what sticks? What happens next?
Right.
But I think as I reflect back, I think it really started actually when I was in elementary school. When I was in elementary school, I was diagnosed with ADHD. They did not really diagnose kids, girls anyways, as autistic back then. So I was diagnosed with ADHD. I was on the highest dose of medication in my entire school. And I knew that because all the kids compared doses and dosages and what medications they were on at lunch. So
they do that.
So I knew that. I knew I was one of the smaller kids and on the highest dose. So I was like, this must be really bad. Turns out
it's not funny, but laughter is our coping skill.
So it turns out there was more going on. That was why I was having so much trouble. But I had a lot of trouble in school. I went to a private school, so I didn't have an IEP or anything. But even at the time, like IEPs were brand new, and like we kind of came up with IEPs in 1975, and we were kind of like, okay, what do we do? And we had no idea what we were doing, so we were making it up as we go. We're still making it up as we go in a lot of ways.
We still are, yes.
So I did not have a lot of supports. I had people who loved me, but I didn't have a lot of people who understood how I was seeing the world or how I learned best or how to support me best. They did the best they could, but there were just limits because they didn't know. And autism was still something we were still kind of like talking about hush hush
Right.
because it wasn't quite as accepted. So I remember I think it was upper elementary school, I told my mom, or maybe it was junior high by the time it fully developed, but definitely by late elementary school, I was already talking about wanting to grow up and help other kids that were like me. And I think at first I wanted to be a teacher, but then I realized I am not a teacher. I am a facilitator. Eventually, I found my way to psychology and actually fell into school psychology by accident. My teacher for statistics walks in the room. She has spiky red hair, cut off jeans, shorts. She says, "Call me Wendy." Turns out she's got a PhD in statistics and psychology. And I'm like, I don't know what she does, but I want to do that. And I ended up loving school psychology. I did not love working within a system because I could see every day when I went to work how the system was failing children. And it was just absolutely heartbreaking. I couldn't stick with it. I'm thankful for the people who can, because we need those services available, because not everyone can homeschool. Not everyone can go to private school. But I could not stay in it and maintain my own health and mental health because it was just so painful to watch, especially having experienced that myself growing up, knowing what it feels like, knowing how misunderstood you can feel. And so that's really kind of what inspired me moving forward. It's kind of always what's driven everything about what I do. I have not forgotten what it feels like to be one of these kids. And I think that guides every single thing I do more than anything else. And it's why I do what I do. I am not in it to make money. If I was, I would open up a small private practice in town and I would make a lot more. I'm really in it because I'm passionate about supporting families, because you can put all the investment you want into a school, but if you take that same amount of effort and money and you put it into parents, you're going to get a lot more progress. Because parents, the parents are truly invested in their children's long-term outcome. I mean, every once in a while, you've got a family where there's enough trauma going on that you're probably not going to make a lot of progress there. But for the most part, you invest in a parent, you will see big payouts in their child. So and that's how I kind of got started. Yeah, it really is. Because parents have control over so much of their child's environment. The school only has control of the school environment. So if the child goes to school hungry, if they go to school without having had a good night's sleep, if they go to school without having, proper clothing or feeling safe and secure, there's not a lot the school can do about it. Like, they can give you some things, but that's not going to solve your problem. It's a Band-Aid.
It is on a gaping bullet wound. And that's what I used to call it, especially with the ratio that they have for service personnel versus numbers of students. It's just simply not there. I'm just nodding internally to everything you've said, because one of the main reasons I left public education and went to start my own private practice at the time, many, many years ago, was because, well, it was a recession. What's the first person on the chopping block? It's service personnel.
Absolutely.
So, and then, so that you're always asked to do more with less.
Fine arts and your mental health supports that are not as important for education, they think. They think.
I mean, and it's just, I mean, it's even going on here now. I was talking to a friend who just left. She was the secretary of public school, and now she's homeschooling her kids. She's like, I'm out. I'm out. I'm done. I'll do this now. But they were talking about how now they're floating art teachers and everything everywhere. So I'm like, there's no way. Band-Aid on a
do
gaping
that.
bullet wound, but I don't want to go down that rabbit hole because that is another show entirely that we can talk about
Oh, it totally
forever.
could be.
Listen,
We could talk for hours.
absolutely, absolutely, and I don't want it to be too much of a soapbox. I want to get back to the beauty that is your book. Can you tell us, how is your book different than other resources out there on neurodiversity?
One, it's very different, very different. I
Let you
don't
tell
think
the
there's
listeners
another.
so.
Yeah, what I would tell you is that most resources approach supporting your child as how can we fix what's wrong with your child? That is not my goal at all. My goal is to help your child be the best themselves that they can be. And it is when we start thinking about kids as you're already great the way you are, how can we help you be the best you that you can be? That's the magic. Because
Yeah.
if we are so focused on, well, we've got to identify what's wrong with you and then we've got to fix it, we're not thinking about how amazing they already are.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Not everything needs a treatment plan. Not everything
Right.
needs a goal for this. Yes. Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. It's love and acceptance. It's unconditional love and acceptance. And, oh, okay, maybe we're the ones who need to change, not how can we change the child.
Well, let's be honest. It's a lot easier.
Eureka!
It's a lot easier to change the adults than it is to change a child.
Yes, it is. Yes, it is.
We have
Even the
control
children are
over
far more
ourselves.
resilient than we are. But yes, we
Yeah, and we
do.
have,
Yes, we do.
yeah, we have
No, please
control
go ahead.
over what we do. You can't really
Mm-hmm.
control a child. They're another person, but
You
you
can't
can
control
control what
another
you do.
person, period.
Right. Yeah, exactly. But you can
Thanks.
control what you do. And if you control what you do,
All
then it
day.
can make a huge difference. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Absolutely. And then you're modeling for them. And that's where they're going to learn the best, when they see you do it as well. And it shows, again, that unconditional love of, oh, okay, here's what
Mm-hmm.
I'm willing to do. And that's what
Yeah.
being the parent of a child with special needs really is. We will go to the ends of the earth. We really will.
Exactly. Exactly. And it really does simply come down to love and balance, finding balance in everything that you do, because when we are balanced, we are happier. Generally speaking, if you've
Yes.
got someone who's unhappy, something's out of balance.
Yeah. And also a bit of acceptance, I would say, to know that there are going to be times when you get knocked out of balance in life, and that's okay. Building those coping skills to handle it when you do, so that you can restore back for the balance. Because 9 times out
No
of 10, when we're
one,
in those moments of
yeah,
balance, we don't even notice it. We only
yeah,
notice
no
it when
one
we're knocked
stays
off,
in balance.
the rocking horse.
Right, no one
No one
stays
stays
in
in
balance, and
balance.
you're right. We often don't notice when we are out of balance. And that's teaching some of that proprioception
Yes,
and interoception,
absolutely.
both of them.
Yes, yes, yes. And for those of you, if you're not familiar with that term, interoception is basically, it's that internal sense. Most people think we have 5 senses. We actually have 8. And so
Mm-hmm.
the interoception is where, the way I kind of liken it to it is, knowing whether or not you're hungry or you're thirsty, or if you need to go to the restroom or something along those lines. And proprioception is knowing where your body is in space, if you will. I call it playing the hokey pokey. By the time they've moved on to the left leg, you're still looking for your right arm. And vestibula has to do with your inner ear and your balance. So those are your additional 3 senses to the 5 that you already know. And you can read more about those senses as well and learn more about them from some wonderful blog posts and some podcasts that I have listened to over at amybodkin.com. I will say this to you for sure. As a therapist and a homeschooling a homeschooling mom of a child who has learning differences, I related so much where we were talking about balance and expanding a little bit further on that. And there's a delicate balance of learning how to live with labels. Oh, they are so necessary for communication, but we have to be careful. You endear us to look beyond the labels to see the child as a person in your book. Can you talk more about how you address that in your book?
Yeah. Diagnoses are necessary in the world that we currently live in. I think in an ideal world, they wouldn't be necessary because we would see each person as an individual and we would be constantly trying to adjust to meet individual needs. But in the world that we live in, yes, it's essential. Uh, but that doesn't mean that we have to, and it's really the worst way to look at a kid. I mean, it might be what you need to get the supports you need, but it's not how you want to see a kid. Um, Now, a lot of us, we will proudly say, I'm autistic, I'm ADHD. A lot of that is us taking ownership of it and saying, yes, and I'm proud of it. Because so many times those labels have been used to make us feel less than. But some of the best ways we can help children feel like they are well loved and they're supported, and to help them feel like I'm valuable. A lot of that is one, trying to meet their needs. So one of the things I talk about in the book is Maslow's hierarchy of needs, because it's a really great, like, basic way to break down our needs that we have, because we have a lot of different kinds of needs. And I mean, there are certain needs that are more like basic, like physical needs, like, we need food to survive. If you're trying to teach someone up here and they're still hungry, we've completely missed the boat on what was most important in that moment. And our highest need is according to Maslow's original hierarchy of needs with the pyramid that some people might have seen in their health books in school, that top part, that's where education happens. And we skip ahead to that because we're like, well, we got to fix all the problems. Well, yeah, but they're a person, so they've got a bunch of other needs. And if we provide all of those supports, kids are like plants. You provide the right supports, they grow. You can't make a plant grow. You can't make a kid grow. You can't make them learn.
Grow.
Right. Yeah, grow. Do it now. So yes, you have to just provide them with what they need and then trust that they will grow, and they will. And some of it is also stepping outside of ourselves and recognizing that they're not the only ones with the special need. Everybody in this life has a special need at some point, because we all go through at least trauma, at the very least. Like, nobody gets out of this life without trauma. I often ask people, I'm like, look, if you do, come back and tell us how you did it, because we all want to know. Because it doesn't happen. We all have it. Exactly. And that creates needs. And if we are willing to acknowledge that we have a special need, just like someone else who's different has a different special need, and put ourselves on that eye-to-eye relationship instead of elevating some people on a pedestal too high to reach. Oh, you're such an inspiration. Everybody hates that. Or trampling other people beneath your feet because they are seen as not having value. And we've so many examples in history of where we have done this. So it's very much a relevant conversation. It's something we're constantly relearning, constantly.
Yeah.
We've got to know that the key is acknowledging that we all have special needs. If we can acknowledge that, that can change the world, because we have categorized people into so many different categories. And when we categorize people into other categories and we don't see ourselves, we make them the other.
Oh. Yeah.
And that's a problem. Yeah. And I think
we're all the other, and it's okay.
Yes. And as a society, I think we are judged by how we treat the most vulnerable of us. And the most vulnerable of us are the ones who either have trouble advocating for themselves because they don't have the skills, or maybe because they're such a small number. We see that a lot in history. Small groups usually end up being the more vulnerable because they have fewer resources. And that's one of the advantages, honestly, of using the word autistic, I think, these days, instead of trying to have Asperger's and autism. because it creates a larger group of people to advocate,
Yeah.
which
Yes, it
is another
does. And it
reason to
doesn't
use special
delineate.
needs.
No, absolutely. Yes, I was kind of glad they switched that over when they did the recent version of the DSM, because I'm like, well, that almost just creates the cool kids table. No, I'm Asperger, so I get to sit over here with the cool kids versus, oh, I'm on this level of functioning with spectrum. I'm like, that's not really fair. Oh, you're Asperger, so you're functioning okay. Yeah, it really creates a cool kids table that's unnecessary.
It does. And I think that's also why it's important to, like, I know a lot of people don't, there's definitely been some conflict over using which terms, like you're going to call it neurodiversity, you're going to call it special needs or whatever. But I think that's one of the important things about using the special needs term and umbrella, because it puts all of us in a category. It makes us a much bigger force for advocacy and for protecting us. So
Yeah, that's a very good point. That is a very good point. And I hadn't thought about it that way quite until I read your book, because I've always used the term learning differences simply because, okay, I've been out of public education since, what year is this? 2010. So it's been a minute and things have changed. RTI was just coming on board when I was hightailing it out of there. So if that makes sense. So things have changed quite a bit since I've been gone. So learning the proper terms, and again, yes, they are just terms and they're a way to communicate. That is their purpose. They're not your whole identity. There's much more to a person than just a term. But speaking a little bit further to when you were talking about advocacy, boy, your book spoke to my mama's heart when it came to talking about advocacy and the role. I've kind of worn my advocate hat. That's what we call it in our house for years and years and years. Our son was diagnosed with DCD, also known as dyspraxia, depending on who you ask and which one you want to call that term, when he was 2. And then the other diagnoses of sensory integration dysfunction and dysgraphia came along a little bit later. But, in all of my years, even as a professional counselor and even working in public education, I was still not familiar with this term, DCD or dyspraxia. And I worked with the DSM. I had a working knowledge of the DSM. And for a diagnosis that is so common, if you will, for lack of a better way of putting it, I thought, why don't I know this? Why didn't I know? How have I not heard of this? I kind of took that to go, oh, other people need to know about this, especially if it's
Oh, yeah.
if it's this common. And that is where, with my first website, I jumped on the advocacy bandwagon. Now, talking about advocacy and the work that I do and the work that you do, I also encourage other parents to be advocates. Some parents are a little bit fearful of that. Can you speak to what would you say to a parent who might be a little bit hesitant in wanting to, as we say, put on their advocate hat?
Well, I would say advocacy can look different. So it's kind of like having a baby. So when you have a baby, you go in there with your birth plan of how you think it's going to go. Sometimes it doesn't go that way. But when you go in there with that plan, you're thinking about what scares me most. Am I more scared of the epidural, or am I more scared of natural childbirth?
Right.
And for different people, this can mean different things. Now, like when I was having my kids, I was more afraid of the epidural because I knew a mom who had been paralyzed from the waist down from it for life. And so it terrified me, even though that's a very rare thing, but it was someone that I knew. And so, what scares you tells us about what is more likely to work for you. So when it comes to advocacy, are you more afraid of having to talk to other people and tell them what you need them to do? Or are you more afraid of doing it yourself? So depending on the person and what our fears are, those can inform the choices that we make. So for me, I don't love having to talk about my children to other teachers in a school setting, like on an IEP team, because one, it's my own children. So that's very personal, which is a little bit different than advocating for someone else's child, or
Right.
that kind of thing. So and also my own past experiences, my own differences, I knew all of those things were going to make that a little bit more difficult for me. So for me, I prefer being able to homeschool my kids myself, because I have a lot more control over how that's going to go down. And if I don't like somebody, I just get rid of them and get somebody new.
Real. Yes. Yes.
It's an option. Now, when it comes to advocating for other people's kids, that's a little less of a challenge, because quite honestly, in that case, I'm coming in as a professional. So I know the likelihood of them arguing with someone who is autistic, a former school psychologist with an emphasis in neuropsychology, and also a homeschooling parent of autistic children. Really, who's going to argue with me? Nobody.
The odds are stacked for you. So
Exactly. But when it comes to my own kids, that's a whole different story. And so I want to be that homeschool parent who's able to kind of decide, who are we going to talk to? Who are we not going to talk to?
true.
Mm-hmm.
Also, there's also levels of ways that you can advocate. You can pick and choose what you're comfortable with. You don't have to film a video and put it out on YouTube. If you're not, you can write a blog post. You can discuss. I'm not saying you approach a random person in the grocery store and tell them all about DCD. I didn't do that. But if it came up at a playground or at a party, or someone would ask me if they noticed my son was, some people are just curious. In a lot of cases, they're just kids that are curious, I'll be honest. When I would have a kid come up and ask, well, why is he not walking yet? Well, we would talk about it. It would usually be an older kid, because they would want to help him walk and just sort of take him. And I'm like, I see falls coming, here we go. So it depends on, you can choose how much of yourself that you put out there in your personal stories of it. But I would say, don't let it scare you away from being able to stand up and give that voice, especially for someone who does not have that voice. And also because later your children are older. If they're, and my son's getting older, the more that he has seen me advocate for him, he is now learning how to self-advocate. That's the next part that comes later. And if you do it earlier, and if you're not sure how, reach out to someone like Amy who can help you learn how to. That's part of we're talking about your book today, but you also have a beautiful practice at home, a consulting firm, where you can help teach people how to advocate for their children. You've mentioned you've not worked with people, or chosen to not have people in your life that you've worked with. I've fired pediatricians. I have fired physical therapists and moved on to a different one. Absolutely, because I'm like, no, I know my child, and I know my child better than anyone else. And if I come to you with a legitimate concern and you brush me off or you fight with me on it, thank you for your time. I'm going to move on.
That brings us actually to two very important points. One, parents know their child better than anyone else. So no matter how many letters someone has after their name, they do not know your child. And you should listen to yourself, because you know as mom. And quite honestly, the best doctor I ever saw, he said, if mom says something's wrong, we look until we find it. Best doctor ever. And so remember that. But also, this brings us also to the important point of, when we don't talk about things, we make it the elephant in the room, the thing that's not okay.
Yeah.
And people have asked me when and how I told my kids they were autistic. I'm like, well, it really never was a big conversation, because it'd be like 3 out of 4 people in my house are autistic. So, it'd be kind of like sitting down and going, all right, we need to have a serious conversation. I hate to break this to you, but you are an American. Everybody else around is an American. This is not earth-shattering news. But they had heard autism many, many times over the years. It's a word I used all the time. It was never something that was concerning. It was always something that was spoken about positively. I never felt like I needed to invade my children's privacy and go up to strangers in the grocery store and be like, Actually, although sometimes the strangers in the grocery store chose to come up to me and tell me, this is why you need to put your child in school. I'm like, actually, no, none of your business. Thank you very much. Goodbye. But that does bring me to another
I've
good
had that
point,
too.
though. Best trick, though, for that, because both of my kids, they did things in a very different order when they were little. So I taught them to sing the Hebrew alphabet, and I told them anytime someone asks you what you're doing for school, tell them that you're learning Hebrew and sing them the alphabet. And so they did, and then nobody would ask me any more questions because they were like, wow, I don't know if they're right or if they're wrong, and clearly she's doing an amazing job homeschooling. Meanwhile, they couldn't read. Well, one of them couldn't read at all, and the other one couldn't understand half of what was said, but they could sing the Hebrew alphabet.
Love it. Love it.
Yeah.
Yes. You have to love the very caring, concerned citizens that approach you in the grocery store. Oh my goodness. Oh my
Yes, and
goodness.
sometimes advocating means just avoiding people and telling them, thank you, we've worked so hard. Goodbye.
Yes. Thank you for your concern. Yes.
Goodbye.
Yes. And in my younger years, yes, when I was really upset, someone said, someone had said something very off-putting to me and then said to me, it takes a village, and I'm like, and clearly yours is missing you. And I was like, okay, so I need to reel that back in. See, you get the joke. And I'm like, okay, my husband said that was not my good day. It was not my best moment. I'm like, I've mellowed out with age. I really have. But when it comes to your child,
It can be
waking up from it.
So emotional. So yeah, and actually thinking ahead in advance of a response that you can give when you're not feeling like saying it, but you need to say something that's relatively polite. That's not a bad thing.
That's right. Practice the skills you need when you don't need them so you can recall them for when you need them. Yes, that was my lesson that day. And she didn't really get the joke anyway. So luckily I was like, okay, let me just move on. And I know better. And my mama would be so upset with me, but still, I was raised better, but it was one of those days.
I still thought it was funny.
My husband thought it was, my husband thought it was pretty funny, but he was like, I'm like, I'm sorry. Well, we talked a little bit about, you mentioned in your book and on your podcast, the heat that you have received and that you continue to receive regarding how you approach the term special needs. So can you speak more about why that term is so important? And we touched on it a little bit about the use of it as an umbrella term, but can you elaborate a little bit for us?
There's a lot more.
There is more.
Yeah. First of all, when I say special needs kids or people too, I feel like I really need to start clarifying to people. I mean that in a very cheeky way. Like, well, yes, they are people too. And apparently that doesn't always come off. So I have now started just telling people this is meant to be cheeky. But special needs is I think a very important term that we need to keep. But the reason it has become problematic is because we have said, oh, well, you have special needs, so you fall in this little box over here and you're not like me. And that's why you need special education and I don't. And so the problem is not the people with the special needs that are causing this issue. It's the other people that aren't willing to admit that they also have special needs. It's the people who are making the short bus jokes and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Or that was in my day. Nowadays it's, oh, you're so autistic. Yeah. And stuff like that. And so because that's kind of poisoned the term special needs in a lot of ways, but it's not the people with special needs' fault. It's the people who choose to not acknowledge that they have special needs. And we've got to change that because we all do have special needs at some point in our lives. And you can't use a term like neurodiverse and it be inclusive, because neurodiverse means that your brain processes information differently. And yes, a child who's had childhood cancer, they're probably going to be neurodiverse because cancer treatment has a huge impact on brain development. But that doesn't mean they're willing to embrace the fact that I have cancer, so now I'm neurodivergent, my brain works different. They've got to take steps to get to that point. And the same thing goes for like autoimmune. One step at a the time, and there's also autoimmune conditions and there's traumatic events. And sometimes we've just got to deal with like what's right in front of us and not have to label ourselves as, oh, we're neurodiverse. Our brains work differently now. I hadn't even thought about that yet. So that's one component. Another term that's popular these days is exceptional. But in an education setting, that's really problematic because exceptional is so often tied to gifted. And gifted is another type of special need, because giftedness means, well, has so many frustrations for me, because a lot of times when we diagnose someone as gifted, it's because of their IQ score. Well, that assumes that the IQ score actually measures intelligence, which it does not. That's a whole other thing. You're going to have to read the book to find out more on that, because we could talk here for hours about my feelings on how we use intelligence tests. But the point being, when we look at kids that are
a testing episode.
Yes. Oh, I could do hours on a testing episode. True. Yeah, there's so many things. But with a gifted child, a lot of times we look at them and go, oh, they're so gifted. They're so smart. They get extra special, like enriching education. And then we look at the kid who's not gifted. So what's the opposite of gifted? Because if we're using the term gifted, then what's the opposite? Are we saying that they're stupid? Because that's kind of what it sounds like. So there's that. Yeah. And then also, we're not giving you enriching education. We're going to stick you in remedial work and just make you do it until you finally get it, because you're not smart enough to get it the first time. None of that sounds good. And so using terms like that, while we can use those terms, I'm not saying we can't use those terms, because there are definitely places where we might want to use them. We have a local group called Emerald Coast Exceptional Families. It serves special needs families. Well, they aren't working in education, though, and that makes a big difference. They're working with families in general. So exceptional doesn't necessarily connotate gifted in that case. Neurodiverse is a very important topic because it broadens that umbrella to include autism and ADHD and so many other things that think and see the world differently, which again gives us a bigger pool for advocacy. But when we're talking about beyond that, though, because more than just neurodiverse kids need supports for learning. Kids with trauma need supports for learning. Kids with cancer need support for learning. Like all these things. Kids who have a parent who has an autoimmune condition, sometimes they need support for learning. Kids who've been adopted, so many different things that can cause us to need support for learning that's beyond neurodiverse. And that's why I like to use the term special needs, because, I mean, yes, we could say human needs, and that technically would work. I'm just afraid that if we went with human needs, then it's basically another way of people bypassing the fact that they have special needs. Oh, yeah, I have human needs. You have human needs, whatever. And they're not really taking the time to embrace the fact that they have special needs, but I also have special needs. So
I think you make a good argument for the use of the term, and you certainly opened my eyes up to something I hadn't, in a way that I had not thought of it before. In all honesty, because after a while, even when you look at the different professionals working in the field, when you tease through all the alphabet soup and then you tease through all the vernacular and the different terms, after a while, at the end of the day, it starts to blur into one mess. So it makes sense as to, oh, okay, this is a term that you can use, and it's one that I'm more aware of now. So I think you make a good argument for using the term to cover that, because it encompasses so many different things.
Now, when I titled the book, though, I titled it Special Needs Kids Are People Too, Seeing the Possibilities Through a Neurodiverse Lens. And the reason I did that was because, yes, special needs kids are people too, and we need to humanize each other instead of going, oh, that's them, they're the other. But we also, I'm coming at it from a neurodiverse perspective. It's why I'm able to do what I'm able to do, because my brain does see the world through a different perspective. And it's why these ideas come to me and don't necessarily come to somebody else.
Because it's your lived experience.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that makes it all the more, well, all the more endearing. It's your personal story. It's something you've not only lived as yourself, but now you've also lived it as a parent. You've lived it as a
Yeah.
professional. So you've
Mhm.
got multiple different lenses through this
Yeah.
very special lens that
Mhm.
you give us a little bit of insight,
Mhm.
definitely, into an experience that many of us have not had and can't have because we haven't lived your experience. But I think it offers a lot of information to parents who might be experiencing something similar as to what you're going through, and that creates community.
Yeah. Yeah. That's so important. It really is. I mean, and
That
that's really why special needs kids or people too is so important, because we need community and we need unifying communities where we can be seen for who we are, and accepted for who we are. And also to
Yeah.
find those other people that are like us and can relate to us, because, you can have true acceptance from all people, but there's only going to be a certain percentage of people who are like truly your people, where you're their cup of tea and you just get each other. That's why we have friends. That's important.
Important. It is very important.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I will say in your book, you definitely invite readers to hold up a mirror to society and to themselves. And really, you in holding up this mirror, when we have to look at that mirror, there's even an exercise in therapy called the mirror exercise that nobody likes to do. Nobody likes it at all because nobody likes to put themselves, it's not the same as a magnifying glass, but nobody likes to take a look at the wholeness of themselves, the good, the bad, the ugly, and the beautiful, all parts, because they're all parts of who we are. But in that viewing of ourselves through the mirror and viewing society through a mirror, this is how we grow. And there's some growing pains that go with growth. It's necessary, it's just part of it, what we call introspection. So while it's challenging at best and it's painful at worst, it's necessary for awareness and understanding and growth. So as we close, what piece of advice do you have for parents of special needs children during the growth process, during that painful process?
Yeah. So I was actually speaking with a mom earlier today. She's a brand new mom, and she just recently got a 12-year-old. So I have a hard time imagining being thrown into the deep end at 12. But I
Mhm.
was telling her that, she was very anxious and nervous. And I told her, well, we all are as parents. We're all afraid of
Yeah.
something. Mostly it's we're afraid that something will happen to us and our children won't be able to take care of themselves. And because of that fear, we try to control everything. Not that we're trying to be control freaks,
Mhm.
but we're trying to make things happen. We're trying to make them learn these skills so that they can take care of themselves so that we won't be afraid anymore. And the reality is that you can't make a child learn. The best thing we can do as parents is be the facilitators. So, we provide opportunities for good food and for clothing and for shelter, and we provide different educational opportunities and social opportunities. So we are providing these opportunities, but we can't actually physically get in their
Mhm.
bodies and make them grow and learn. They have to do that for
Mhm.
themselves. And
Mhm.
so a lot of it is figuring out how can we be a good facilitator and figuring out what are the most important things. So when a family comes to me to do a consult, that's a lot of times what we're doing. I'm going back and I'm looking at everything. Like I want all their records. I want to paw through everything. I give them a big long like 16, 17 page questionnaire. I'm extremely detailed because I want to go, okay, what do we have going on here? And then which things are your outer layer? Because a lot of times they'll say kids are like onions or roses, depending on how you want to look
Yeah.
at it. If you have a stinkier child, you might want to go with an onion. Teenage boy, I mean, it happens. Um, but, there's an outside layer and you've got to
Mhm.
work on the outside layer. But a lot of times we want to skip to the
Yeah.
center and we go, oh, we need to work on reading. It's like, whoa, 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 back up. Have we made sure that they are healthy and that they have good nutrition and that they don't have some kind of underlying health problem? A lot of times when I see kids with a learning difference, there's an underlying health problem that's been missed because most pediatricians see normal developing kids. They don't
Right.
see the atypical. I see only the atypical. So I'm much more likely to go, oh, they missed this. You need to ask them about this. So we'll
Right.
look at that. Or, what else is blocking? Oh, communication is blocking you. You're having trouble understanding what people are saying. No, we don't need to skip ahead to reading. We need to go back and grab that. And trying to go through things in an orderly way, remembering that we have to go through the stages of development. You can't just randomly skip and hop to different ones. They need to go through the process. They'll go through it in their own way. You can't rush it.
Right.
Kind of like in The Princess
In their own
Bride, you rush
time.
a
Yes.
miracle. Yeah, you rush a miracle, you get rotten miracles. That's how it works.
Yes.
And kids are miracles for real. So yeah, we can do all of those kinds of things to support them, but the real key is figuring out what those outer pieces are. And that's kind of what I specialize in, because I love data. Like most, not all autistics, but a lot of autistics, we love our data. And I'm really good at patterns, really good at patterns. So, I look at all that data and I'm like, okay, so these are our top 3 things that are most important right now. And this is how much we can reasonably do without overloading anyone's brain. Because if we overload everyone's brain, then it doesn't work.
Right.
And then you don't make as much progress. So I would say, generally, like to sum that up, I would say to parents to remember that you don't have to make them grow. You don't have to make them learn. Your job is to facilitate. And if you need help figuring out what resources you need next, come find me or somebody like me who can help you find what your next things are. That's what I would say.
And that is so well said. Amy, I am so thankful that you are part of the Homeschool Counseling Network. I am thankful for your beautiful book. I am thankful for what you have written and for the work that you are doing, because I'm not saying by any means, not that you were wasted on the school system by any means whatsoever. You did those kids a beautiful service when you were there. But right here where you are, being able to offer these consulting services to homeschooling families, because they have the power to go further.
Yeah.
I'm sure
Yes.
it's much less frustrating for you and much less frustrating for the families. I can imagine that doing what you get to do now as a consultant is incredibly empowering, and you've found right where you need to be.
Yes, and I do sometimes still get public or private school students. There's just a limit to how much I can offer their families as compared to what I can offer
Sure.
homeschool families. But yeah, this is definitely the space where I shine, where this is, the space I'm meant to be in. I feel like I made a positive impact on the schools I was in. I'm not entirely certain my principals enjoyed having me because I tended to rock the boat, if you can imagine
I
that.
got in trouble a lot. When I was at IEP meetings, I got in trouble a lot.
Yes, all the time.
But special ed always wanted me to come to the meetings because I was the best advocate. They're like, no, we want Kimberly. We don't want the admin. We want because I was just a guidance counselor. I was a school counselor. They're like, no, we want Kimberly to come to the meeting. Okay.
That's awesome. That's awesome.
So, but that's what an advocate does. I'm like, no, we're all here for the kid. Let's make it happen.
Yeah.
Let's make it happen.
And it's much easier to make that happen when you have more control over what's happening. And as homeschoolers, we have a lot more control. Whether you do the homeschooling or not, you get to decide who's got time and access to your kid.
That is so true.
Mm-hmm.
That is so very true. Well, if you want to find Amy's beautiful book, Special Needs Kids Are People Too, Seeing the Possibilities Through a Neurodiverse Lens, she's at Amazon. You can find it on her website at amybodkin.com, and we will put all kinds of links to that in the show notes. And I would like to say thank you so much for your time today and for being a part of the Homeschool Counseling Network and for all of the work that you do.
Thank you, Kimberly. I am very happy to be a part of it. It's nice we have that option.
We look forward to chatting with you. Oh, yeah. Well, I'm glad. I'm glad. And we hope to see you maybe on some future episodes. Maybe we can talk about why the difference between testing and assessment and why that's important, because I think a lot of times parents don't realize that it's a very useful tool when you're homeschooling.
Well,
There's even some benefits to having an IEP, even as a
and let's be
homeschooler.
honest, sometimes the professionals aren't very clear on how we can use those scores to the best of our ability, which is very disturbing.
Well, that is true. That's true. Just because they're
But I
good
get
at giving the
IEPs,
test doesn't mean that, like, yeah,
right? I get IEPs across my desk from all over the country. And I can tell you that a
oh,
lot of our testing, even coming from private practice, we're not making as much use of our testing information as we could. So,
cool. Good to know. Good to know. We might have to chat with my testing information. Like, we were assessed 2 years ago. Let's talk about this. Thank you so much for your time today, and we look forward to seeing you around the homeschooling circuit.
thank you, Kimberly.
The Homeschool Counseling Network recognizes the comfort of having a community. We offer the Homeschool Counseling Network Public Resource Sharing Group, a public group on Facebook where individuals, organizations, families, and professionals are welcome to openly share information and resources. Looking to learn from a particular specialist or educator in one of these fields? Reach out and let us know. You can send us your comments and questions to Kimberly Bennett, LPC, at outlook.com, or by commenting in the public Facebook group. With the Homeschool Counseling Podcast, we are working to bridge the gap between professionals and homeschooling families. Are you searching for a professional in your area to help support your family on your homeschooling journey? Visit our website at www.homeschoolcounselingnetwork.com. Look under the Parents tab, where you will find a subcategory, Find a Professional. Here you will find lists of service providers organized by areas of specialty in 4 main categories: academic advising, counseling and mental health, testing, therapy, and tutoring. We've also added some new categories: professional coaching and courses and classes. Providers are also categorized by state, population served, and areas of expertise. Credentials and contact information are also included. Also on our website, you'll find a variety of digital media, including blog posts, free downloads, and a searchable free resource library covering a range of topics relevant to homeschooling, education, therapy, and mental health. Content is created by me, Kimberly Bennett, your host, and some professional friends and fellow homeschooling parents that I have met along the way in my family's homeschooling journey. By collaborating with service providers and professionals in the community, strategic partners, donors, sponsors, and advertisers who share our vision and believe in our mission, we endeavor to provide free quality resources to inspire, inform, and improve the lives of homeschooling families. Are you a professional interested in partnering with us? Visit our website and click on the Professionals tab. You can join our network and have your business or practice listed among our multiple resource lists for free. Have a heart for service? Would you like to pour your knowledge into the homeschooling community? Consider contributing content to our free resource library. There are multiple opportunities to participate, including writing guest blog posts, recording a guest blog, or sharing downloads or printables. Looking for a wider reach? Coming soon! HCN will offer paid advertising opportunities. Be sure to subscribe to our newsletter at homeschoolcounselingnetwork.com to keep updated with all of our latest developments. Education is a journey that we are not meant to take alone. There is great comfort in community. Until we meet again, thanks for being part of our village.